I'm hoping this is not going to be as long a meeting as has been in the past, because we have a couple of minor changes to the agenda. I had a slot in the agenda for the Burbank Y as for some follow-up questions, and they would prefer to come on the 6th. So that will be deferred to then. Unfortunately, the first presenter, which is the First Congregational Church of Reading, they also need to reschedule for something last minute, and they're not able to be here by Zoom. So that cuts a couple of things off the agenda, but does leave more time for other parts of our agenda, which will include hearing from Mr. Wise and Mr. Brandt, their further consideration of premium pay approaches. I know they were going to work on a formula, and they're still refining some of the inputs, but we can hear about their approach and what they've agreed on so far. And I'm glad to see we have Mr. Grimes back, because we get to have him hear his views on some of the parts of our allocation spreadsheet that we've discussed before. And then, of course, we have, minutes and future agenda. And as some of you know, our next meeting is going to be kind of quickly after this, on September 6th, with the 2 deferred presenters. But the one presenter we do expect to have this evening, but maybe not until his time at 7:30, was Mr. Fiorentino, to talk about another, some of the experiences of the AFSCME union and additional
Easier.
presenter. Yes, okay. So,
Marianne, I think we need a roll call to order with Andrew.
so I'll just, that was just an overview of things, so I will go through the roll call. Jeff Corum, Dr. Corum,
Here.
Joe McDonough,
Here.
Chris Haley,
Here.
Tom Wise,
Here.
Sean Brandt,
Here.
Andrew Grimes. Jackie, do you have him up on the
He's
Zoom?
there, but he's on mute.
He's on mute.
There he goes.
All right, thank you. So, before we get into the agenda, which I gave an overview of before roll call, is there any public comment this evening? Okay, seeing none, and as I mentioned, the first item on the agenda is being deferred till the 6th. I'm ready to hear from Mr. Fiorentino. If you would like to just please come up to.
Is there a way we can go still at 7:30, just because I had passed along that time?
Okay,
with all
sure.
the other folks.
So.
Sorry about that.
No, that's, I think I indicated in my email to you, so what I would then, just have the board do in the meantime is, maybe look at some of the stuff that we normally have at the end.
We can
Good
start.
on the model
We
as
may
well.
not finish by 7:30, but we can pause at that point and go to him, but Sean and I can start if you want us to.
Sure. We'll do 20 minutes of that then, and that'll give us good time to settle in our minds, because
Okay.
I'm sure it's gonna be
Appreciate
very
that. Thank
complicated. Nope, no worries at all. I appreciate your flexibility anyway.
Okay, I guess I'll start and
Yeah, go on.
jump in.
Yep.
So I'm gonna share, hopefully I think I can share on the screen so people can see it appropriately, and then we can increase size so that it's not mini and all that kind of fun stuff as we go through. So the model that we put together is, we basically have two models that are put together so far. And they both have this same underlying tenet of how it was structured. So we'll just walk through that to get started. First, and this is an item for us to discuss as a committee, but for now, for the model, we said a person had to be a member of the town or school staff, bargaining unit or not, from March 2020 through June 2021, or some portion thereof. They had to be employed at the end of the measurement month. So whether that's, April 30th, May 31st, June 30th, et cetera. Retirees counted for the months they were employed, but not the months after retirement. Those who left employment with the town during the measurement period or after, but that didn't retire, were not considered, they were excluded. A full-time employee count for 1 FTE, a part-time employee counted for 0.5 FTE. It's not a perfect math formula, so There's that. No shift work or per diem employees or otherwise temporary staff were included in the model. There are a few cases where that exists. We do have most of the HR data from the schools calculated and populated. We're still working through, and that includes the cafeteria workers,
Nice.
and your numbers match exactly what we have.
Great.
So we're covered in that regard. We are still waiting, and Fidel and team are still working on the town side. But in fairness to them, we have traded back and forth. He sent us a lot of information. We gave some clarifying questions earlier today, and he and Sean are working through that on the town side. So that will need to be added to this, but conceptually, the model will still hold. We'll just add in some more rows appropriately. The in-person work status needs to be reviewed, but the general guidelines we used as we did this is if fully in-person for the full month, 1 is a value. These will mean more as we go through the models. If in-person for 4 or 5 days per 2 weeks, which happened with both the library staff and many of the school staff members, generally we tried to use 0.5 as the value. This overall is a relatively blunt instrument, so we've tried to avoid smaller increments in terms of like 0.1s, 0.2s. There's one exception where for a period of time the library staff had basically 10% of its staff in person, and they were able to document that, so we did, just to kind of account for the library at 0.1 for a couple month period appropriately. We also implemented a couple of different concepts in the model. The first one, Model 1, calls for a pay band construct. It does need to be validated at a high level with senior town staff and leadership. That basically calls for, the concept of a lower paid employee, a moderately paid employee, and a higher paid employee. And there are different payment rates based upon those built into the model as it stands right now. The concept there was aligned to what the original ARPA guidance was, that the premium pay should focus primarily on those that are lower paid employees. So this gives a bit of a bump to the lower paid employees from a model perspective. The model also includes the ability to do goal seek. So it's all formulaically driven. You can just set the total number that we want to put and it will calculate everything else. So if we want to put 700,000, 500,000, 300,000, 1.2 million, whatever the number is that we as a committee agree to do, it will calculate everything else appropriately. And so there's a process for it to do that. Model 1 is basically just the pay bands model. And as I mentioned already, it's, lower income has a higher per month payment. Basically, you'll see that shortly. And, prior to the goal seek, one of the inputs to the formula is the differentiation rate. Do you want it to be a 20% premium and a 20% discount? Do you want it to be a 25%, 30%, 50%, or 0%? Technically, you can do 0%, and it would resolve everybody at the same rate.
Excuse me, Tom, so
Yep.
Andrew, do you have your hand up? It says you're talking?
Nope.
Oh, okay,
Interesting.
sorry, go
Didn't
on,
see that.
Tom, I just didn't know.
Yep.
It was-
No problem.
Didn't pause.
So that's Model 1. It's pretty straightforward. And before I go into Model 2, I'm just going to jump to Model 1 a little bit and demonstrate where we stand with certain things. This will zoom in and zoom out as we need to. We have, for the sake of argument, just to put this in right now as we're working it through, this total appropriation number is the number you use in the goal seek appropriately after you've input this differential number. You put this differential number in, it'll change everything, and then you use the goal seek concept. But before we go through that to show it, what we have here is your different bargaining or non-bargaining groups, as the case may be, the subgroup as appropriate if there is a subgroup, and then how many people were employed for that month end all the way through the period in question. The data for the schools is directly from the schools. The data from the town is from various different points of feedback. From a public safety perspective, it came from the presenter there, and Fidel provided some of these portions of information for his different non-union staff. We have other union staff that are working through those numbers as Fidel and Sean work through it. But ultimately, this is the number of employees employed for each month end for that period of time we're talking about. As we work through that, then, this in-person work status is kind of the key to driving a lot of this, determining whether that group of workers was in person for that period of time. this is at a high level. It's not saying individual people. This is saying collectively the group. So we're not trying to go down to that fine grain of each individual person. We're trying to say that collective group of people generally was in person or not. And as previously discussed, for half the month they were in person, it shows up as 0.5. For the full month they were in person, it shows up as 1. And we're not going to too many other grains of difference there necessarily. I saw a question coming.
No, now I understand. I was just gonna mention is there, not that I'm trying to complicate this, but it might be, is there a graphical way to view this, or have you put any graphs so we could just get a picture? There's a lot to absorb there, like if we said, okay, you know, we have, up until like the first 6 months of it, we only really have 20% of our staff to worry about, then it bumps up, and that, maybe that can come later.
We
I just
could,
think that
if-
would be easier for everyone to.
If that's desired, we could build that. It's all formulaically calculated.
Oh, yeah,
It's not
and
hard.
Excel can generate.
But it's not currently calculated in such a way. You could theoretically just do the math between this and the top line, and you have another subtable. The next table is the kicker table.
Sorry.
Yep.
There's a lot of roads. This is the figures that are in there are non-union staff assigned to those departments. So it doesn't include union members.
Yet.
Okay.
That needs to be added.
Okay.
Yep. That's the still pending work that's happening, right? So this last table is the calculated table. And essentially it uses the pay category and the pay rate above, the number of people and whether they're in person for that period of time, and calculates that month's calculation for that group of people. Now, we need to add, to Fidel's point, a set of other groups of people potentially, and that could be a conversation for this group, this body to have too, which groups, if we want to differentiate appropriately, which groups would go into those. As mentioned, the pay category is just a rough number for now. We'll need to review that with Tom and Fidel and come up with some sort of metric or way to associate that, whether it's contract review or other things, just to try to build the model appropriately. This is not final, nowhere near close to final, but it's just conceptual for us to walk through.
And it's
Okay?
just one of the models. You have another
It's
tab
just, there's
there.
another tab that has one other model to it as well. So this ultimately, all of these numbers then add up to what is the total number at the top that we looked at the beginning. And so your total appropriation of 750,000, assuming that is the case, was what would happen here. But this implies a differential. Let's just say we're not comfortable with a 30% differential. We want a 20% differential. So if we want to adjust the 20% differential,
You have to do a minus 20 there,
yep,
yeah.
then we see the adjustment. Now, we still want a 750,000 appropriation. What do we want to do for that? Well, let's just run the goal seek appropriately. We're going to set the total appropriation to 750,000, and we're going to change the medium level. And it's going to calculate everything. We're still going to give 750,000, but now the low is adjusted, the medium is adjusted, and the high is adjusted appropriately.
And you can change if the appropriation were deemed to be 600,000 or something.
Any number that we
anything
wanted to
can-
do, we can adjust that appropriately. And the goal seek quickly answers the question. This could be an odd number, a decimal place. It could be anything we want it to be, right? But it's just a calculated formula to then generate those numbers appropriately, so that the allocation works down the path.
Yeah, I mean, we built in this functionality so that you could work backwards from a number, from a total number, a bottom line if you wanted to. But you also could say, if we wanted round numbers, medium could be 80, and then you're plus or minus 20, and you'll just get the result, right? So, yeah, you could hard code an 80 there, for
Which is- you
instance.
can-
And the numbers in there, high is higher than low, so that's the monthly pay rate that you're supplementing on top of. That's what that
The
means.
assumption is that high is somebody who is generally more highly paid.
So
and
they get less
they get less.
supplementing.
Yeah,
Okay.
and,
Whatever out of
you know,
the
and broadly speaking, those buckets, like the high bucket are, you know, senior administrators in the schools, senior town staff, you know, the folks that are higher pay grades, basically, higher pay brackets, basically.
Correct, but that is also something to be ironed out.
Right.
Because there are
Some assumptions.
There's
baked in there.
certainly some assumptions. You could
Yeah.
break certain things down into other categories, and the model generally will work its way through. If we say there are highly paid teachers, there are medium paid teachers, and low paid teachers, we could do that if we wanted to. Conceptually, that will apply here. You just have to break the category and then figure out how to build the numbers that build the staff levels. Once you have that, this whole thing falls through
Yeah,
appropriately.
I mean, those collective bargaining units came to us, someone correct me if my recollection is wrong. I don't know that, I think they were recognizing they were different than paras or secretaries, but I don't know that they were looking for differentiation within the, the step levels and pays of the teachers. That's,
Yeah.
it's possible to consider, because obviously we have some younger, less experienced, lower paid teachers. And
Yeah, and I mean, you could see the same thing within any cohort, right?
Yep.
Police officers who are, newer officers who didn't work a lot of overtime versus a lieutenant who happened to work a lot of overtime, right? And they're gonna be in different pay buckets as well,
Right.
potentially. So, I think from a starting point perspective, we thought about cohorts and their sort of general pay band relative to others, rather than trying to differentiate within each cohort.
that's a lot.
We can tune this as much as we want
Yep.
to. The conceptual model will work once we figure out how far down the tuning we want to go. So this is the basic first conceptual model, and it drives out of that basic ARPA premise that you want to focus on your lower paid employees as part of the premium pay process, and then adjust appropriately, right? So that's model number one. Now, model number two adds another level to it for another idea. And that idea is, and this has been working in progress, so the concept of how frequently a body is in contact with the community. So this is a second layer to the model. So if a body is heavily in contact with the community, they're seeing a student every day, or a set of students, or 100 students, or whatever, or they're seeing the public, they're going into houses every day or every other day, or something else along those lines, there's a multiplication factor that applies to that concept in this model. This essentially is a proxy for risk. It's not a perfect proxy. It's another blunt instrument, but it's a proxy for risk that the individual or group of individuals taking in.
What do you define as public? Like, does
Well, let's
coworkers count as public?
And so I'm gonna go through that, so
Okay.
thank you for jumping into my next set. I tried to do a rough definition of high, medium, and low contact. And so a group that saw or had the potential to see many members of the public on a normal day. So again, that could be students, it could be going into people's houses, et cetera. Medium is a group that saw or had potential to see a moderate number. This is all rough. And then low is a group that, while in person, generally worked among themselves with limited interaction with other members of the public. So
Like the library?
the library for a period of time was low, right? For most of the time was low. There are other members, some of the admin staff might be low, because really they're in person, but they're amongst themselves. They're not seeing a lot of people, whereas public services might be a little high or moderate, because they're seeing more people on a regular basis. And so how does that adjust? And then the same thing holds here with goal seek, except there's one additional input to the goal seek, and that's again, this is a word Sean and I have been working through, community contact, to adjust for whether they should be positively impacted or, negatively, for lack of a better way to say, impacted by the model. The same concepts apply to this tab as well, and the same other data applies to this tab. You just have, if I have low contact, so this is kind of the opposite of the rates. If I have low contact, I'm taking less risk, there's less premium pay. If I have high contact, I'm taking more risk, there's more premium pay. So that's the concept that's applying here. So there's a multiplication factor that goes with that. And again, very rough, filling in the gap here of what high contact meant or low contact meant appropriately as you went down the path. And it's just a rough over the region, over the time period overall. It's not going to be on a month-by-month basis, because we've already accounted for that, whether they're in person or not.
So
right.
you're not gonna have the combinatorial algorithm looking for the best match of low pay and high contact, get your
absolutely
Hungarian
not.
matching going?
No, so this is just another minor adjustment to the model that provides, and all of this, as I think we've talked in the previous conversations, is not going to be perfect. We're never going to fully reward people for the risks they really took. It's just trying to account for a few different points of view that we've had in these conversations overall about risk, time in person, and overall pay level as we've tried to go through. So the same formulaic model applies down the stream based upon the community contact that's in place for that bucket of people. And then the same formulaic stuff can be done at the top. Again, going back, we wanted to go to 20% and minus 20%, and we want the contact level. We're going to say we really think this is a bigger factor. I'm just going to, for sake of argument, play with it a little bit more. To make it even more extreme, you can do that and then adjust your appropriation again with the goal sync functionality to say, we want that to be 600,000, as Mary Ann just said.
Oh, yeah, because it just went up to 832 from
Yep.
750.
Because you have a set of high contact people that have low pay, right? So it kind of, it's a multiplier factor. So that, all of that's, again, just another set of factors to the model. We can choose model 1, model 2, we can choose none of the above. But this was trying to coalesce some of the conversations we've had before into a discernible way in which we could say, you know, instead of randomly saying that person deserves this money, it kind of tries to formulaically do it. Joe had his hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we have 5 minutes for quick questions before the first agenda. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, no, Tom, this is really good. So in the last column, right, so do you have like a total by category?
I do.
Yeah, it'd be useful
And
to
what's
see
that?
what numbers
And
people are
then,
getting out
like,
of this.
Just
This-
like based
this doesn't
on these
account.
numbers?
This
Yeah.
doesn't account for those other bodies, right, that are not yet accounted for, right? So
Okay.
as we add more, these numbers will adjust
Yeah.
appropriately, but yes, as you look at it, you have, you know, different bodies that have certain things, and if I just let me freeze certain things
Yeah.
here so we can see things
So
in
like to
order.
get like a unit or like per employee, right, it'd be that total amount by the number of employees in that category, I guess, is that right?
Sort of, yeah.
Well, like,
It's-
with what it is now, go all the way to the end, what does it, the low, high contact, first person line cafeteria worker, what would they get? With just the way it is now, say you assume 600, do you scroll all the way over and you say, is there some point where it
It's-
says they get $1,000 or they get something
So,
like that?
I mean, it's not a perfect number, because you can't
Right.
really, because it is what it is, right? But if you were to say this divided by, just say on average, they're 10 people, it's about $1,200
Okay,
that they get.
that's,
Give or
Is
take.
there 10 people?
There's 9 to 10
In that-
depending,
in
and
that
then they
case,
have
yeah.
part in person and then full in person, and so it's not a perfect, you know, number from an average
Okay,
perspective,
because
but
the pot versus full, yeah.
it would
Yeah.
adjust
Yeah.
based
Okay,
on
got
that.
it, okay.
Yeah, can I
This is good.
just make a couple comments? So one, Tom's being generous. Tom deserves 99.99% of the credit on this. I think we had a similar approach in mind, and he got there about a half a day before I did. So he did most of the lifting on this. I added that fancy goal seek stuff at the top, and that was about it. So that's number one. Number two is I think that this approach, you know, starting with Model 1 and then you know Model 2 we can talk about as well. But the approach in Model 1 of just thinking about it in terms of person months and the amount of time an individual spend in person as being sort of the thing that drives, you know, what they're eligible for or what they should get out of this, I think was intended to represent what we felt like the group was sort of coalescing around, right? That, you know, for that period of March through what we called the June, the end of the state of emergency, I think that was, of March of 20 through June of 21, the number of months somebody worked in that period would be what would essentially dictate what they were eligible for relative to others. And then, you know, as Tom said, that differential piece based on pay, I think was a reflection on that original guidance around ARPA. You know, up for debate for the group for how significant that differential should be, of course, or whether we want to continue to keep it. But that was certainly the thought there. And then on Model 2, when we introduced sort of that risk differential for community contact, you know, again, I think a discussion for the committee because we heard different opinions about how much do we want to, you know, are we paying for physical risk that people took? Are we paying for, you know, additional work and effort that people had to invest to sort of get through their job during the pandemic? Are we paying for, you know, sort of the mental taxation on folks in different roles? Like what exactly are we paying for? And so this, as Tom said, is a good proxy for that. You know, if we're leaning into sort of the physical risk aspect, the community contact is intended to be a good proxy for that.
any
So.
other quick questions from, go ahead, Chris.
Not really a question, but I'm just wondering how much we can license this to other cities and towns, because I,
Enough to double the numbers, maybe? I don't know.
I'll help you file a patent.
I don't even think Boston did what is on the screen right now, so kudos to you for squaring everything away with this. I mean, I didn't expect it to look like this. That's just the amount of time that must have went into this. I don't know. It's just kind of crazy to me. but
Tom's pretty fast with Excel, but it was a good chunk of time
Hopefully none of
nonetheless,
this
yeah.
was done on your overseas vacation,
yeah.
No,
No.
so you've got your vacation.
So Sean and I both came to the realization that, we need to make sure we have something ready for tomorrow, last night. It just so
Well,
happened
You
that
did this
Sean had
last
something.
night.
Well, and
I
in
take it
fairness,
all back then.
in fairness, it wasn't about, you know, waiting till the last minute so much as there were a lot of data elements that were coming in the last few days that, you know, it was almost impossible to build anything even illustrative, until we got some of those data elements, so, that's why it was a little bit more last minute than probably either of us normally would have approached it.
So $500 is a good figure if anyone out there wants to purchase this Excel file from you.
Our per hour rates are higher than that.
All right.
It wasn't all completed last night either. I mean, there was some tuning and things that happened throughout the day, but it's conceptually, I think it hits on some of the key points we've talked about, right? Is that salary separation, the in-person concept, and potentially the differentiation of risk if we want to agree and work through a process of risk taking that was taken by the different workers in the different bodies, right?
Well, that's a good segue that I have to have you pause, because it is time in our agenda to hear about some of those issues from our bargaining units that are here. So I welcome the AFSCME members and Michael Fiantino. Thank you.
Ready for me to get started?
Yes,
So, I know there's 20 minutes that you had allotted, but
you can take all the time you need.
well, I'll probably be relatively brief, and then I know there's some members from some of our respective bargaining units that might want to make some comments too. But we'll be within the 20 minutes.
But also,
certainly.
in view of what Mr. Wise was speaking about too, with in-person and
Right.
working amongst yourselves or contact with the public, be sure to elaborate to us, because that'll be something that they
Yeah.
want to know about. Thank
Sure,
you.
absolutely. So yeah, I'll just start with some general remarks. I guess the first thing I want to say is we definitely appreciate the seriousness with which this committee has approached, the issue of hazard pay. I think it's very commendable. Not every town, I think, has truly followed the spirit of ARPA money, and one of the main categories was certainly to provide hazard pay to essential workers, to the boots on the ground that kept things going. So just as a general first point, it's commendable that you've taken it seriously, and it's certainly a positive development. So I'll just say kudos for that. We sent over some information so we have about 7 units, 8 if you want to split hairs. So we represent town facilities, school custodial employees, school cafeteria, engineers who are technically within the DPW department, DPW workers, and then a couple units that I haven't seen up there, but I think deserve some discussion are members of Reading Municipal Light, so the line unit and also the clerical and technical employees. Now I know that they're a public utility and there's a little bit of a different dynamic there, but they were certainly in public throughout. And at RMLD, they were short-staffed for a good part of it, but they were certainly in public during the 15 or so months when there was a state of emergency. Literally keeping the lights on, obviously, at RMLD. So I think it's something to factor in. I hesitate to go too in depth because there's the people that are actually there that did it that are going to speak more personally, but. I'm very proud to represent these units. These are all units that maybe there was a few weeks or a few months of staggered schedules, but these are all, job categories that couldn't really be done remotely, right? We can't keep, buildings clean and safe remotely. People can't work on power lines remotely. Water main breaks, that's something that can't be addressed remotely. You can't feed children remotely, obviously, in the schools. So if you guys want to just come up, we're all got a couple more there. So I know you're still working through the formulas, but I guess my comments, I really just wanted to reiterate, 1, the appreciation for some positive movement here, and 2, just take it into account and let's try to get it as high as possible within reason, right? Because really these folks kept things moving, and that's true for certainly of all the essential workers in the town. But I'm obviously here as a representative of AFSCME, and it's my very firm opinion that they kept the lights on and everything running through that time. So I just wanted to make that general pitch and turn it over to any of our members who wanted to make more specific comments. I know Alex had some things to say.
Did
We have a
you want
question
to show
first.
about the spreadsheets, or?
No, that's okay.
No, I don't think
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
I think we're not gonna top that spreadsheet over there to start.
And they did send to me
I have
spreadsheets
them.
with
So,
the.
yeah, if you wanna pull them
100%.
up, Mike can talk through them, but, you know, to echo his words, we met virtually when I asked for, some ARPA funding for the Summers Morgan project, and we got great news on that, obviously, yesterday. And at the time, I commended you guys for, it's a touchy process talking about this stuff in public. I think you guys have done a very good job of towing the line between deciding who was most at risk and who's most deserving. And the fact that you got to that spreadsheet with dollars and cents is wildly impressive. That is an incredible effort by you guys in providing the data here. And for me, you know, I know we talked with a couple of different unions, a bunch of the water guys, facilities, fire, and it's tough to get into the dollars and cents on who deserves what, because when you kind of get to it, we're all essential workers, and we all did our jobs in a time where it was difficult to do our jobs. And I think for us in, you know, the water, sewer, parks, forestry, highway, we went staggered, and I can't speak for Public Works, I'm not in charge of Public Works, I'm in engineering, but at the time, I recall the conversations where we needed to go staggered in case that an outbreak happened in that department. We couldn't afford to lose the entire water department. If a snowstorm was coming, you can't afford to lose your highway department. So we're a little bit past the point, I think, in deciding who was in person and who wasn't between different departments, because people were sent home, so we did not have a loss of service. If we had a water main break, these guys had to have their phone on. If they did not come in an hour, they were docked a vacation day. So people weren't jetting away to, you know, Maine and New Hampshire. People were waiting for phone calls in case something went wrong. So that's where I would say that it's difficult to get past the point of who was here, who wasn't. For me, it's, did that department or that union serve their function to the town of Reading in a time when it was needed? And truthfully, our water rates, our water, I don't want to talk water rates. Our water usage, we've broken a record every single year since the pandemic started. So when everyone went home, we were the ones providing essential water, sewer, drain, highway, facilities, fire, police. So I don't like to get between everyone. I think everyone did their job. And you know, that's really all I had. I had one other point, but I wasn't planning on talking until about 5 minutes ago. So for me, it's, you know, we're all a team, and I hate for the divisions between towns to be sown, and even interdepartment to say, this admin was home and this admin was in person, but that admin had more of a role at home that they could do. And I also want to give a shout out to the non-union town hall employees who I see, you know, day in and day out. I think when it comes down to it, everyone kind of got the job done. So that's all I got. If anyone else has any specifics, feel free.
No, I was up last time I spoke, I'm with the facilities department, and I echo that. We were here when we need to be here. We were asked to come in and do what we had to do, and, you know, we didn't gripe about it, we just did what we had to do. So again, I thank you for all for listening to us, and hopefully we can get something squared away.
Hi, my name is Maureen. I'm one of the managers at the Parker Middle School. And this is Maria. She's at the one of the elementary schools. And we just, you know, want to thank you for, you know, considering the cafeteria workers that came in and tried keeping the town fed as much as we could. Maria and I did food distribution over the summer when the schools were closed.
It's the summer of 2020.
Yep.
and
Yep.
Everyone was.
Yep, and so we were in there every week, packing up food and putting it in bags per family, dividing it by families and delivering it, you know, as they pulled up. And then when we were called back in sporadically, you know, they called back managers, and then as much as the town would allow, as many people as we could get in there, we were one of the, some of the workers there's a lot of elderly ones, so they chose not to come back, which I totally understand, and, so it was left up to the individual whether they wanted to or not, but, we both have families.
That kept us short at the schools.
Yep.
This is my third year with being 2 people in the kitchen,
Yeah,
when there used to be 4.
yeah, and I have 3, and there used to be
Because of
4,
COVID.
but,
Yeah.
And so now, since then, like when the students finally came back, were you also interacting with students?
Oh,
as well?
absolutely, yeah.
So that's
Yes.
why-
We would be at the register, I'm at the register, and the petition is, they set up my
we
thing,
have plexiglass.
but it wasn't me, it was my computer that was protected.
Plus, they
Yeah,
all were removing,
exactly.
Yeah,
they
it
all
was
were
the
removing
computer.
their masks while eating.
Yeah,
and
we
you
had
the
to,
same
yeah.
one with it, so that's kind of,
Yeah,
And they're elementary school kids, so,
Yes.
yeah,
they,
Yeah.
so
Some
you
cases,
know,
yeah.
they're all over you, absolutely,
And they're middle school, and so I say, I can't hear you, have to speak up, they go,
yeah.
I'm like, oh. No, so yeah, that's, they divided the kids, put half in the cafeteria, half upstairs. Some kitchens managers had to deliver foods to different areas of their schools, which was, a total change for everybody. One of I think it was the Killam that was putting together cart after cart after cart of food to deliver to the gyms, to every classroom, because the principal didn't want them coming into the cafeteria. So, they were only 2 people. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of work on everybody. So I just, appreciate you thinking of the cafeteria people.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
thank you.
Thanks.
Hey everybody, I'm Bob Forsey, I'm a firefighter in town. I spoke with a lot of familiar faces, so I think it was this committee a little less than a year or so ago. So I just want to start by thanking you for all the work that you've put in. Spreadsheet, very impressive, very cool. I can say that personally, for me, it's a little tough to be standing up here and feeling like I've got my hand out, because our job is explicitly to take care of sick people, which is what we did during the pandemic, so it wasn't really an above and beyond, more of just like doing our jobs like we always would. We did that, and we were at risk a lot of the time, and we did have instances where members came down with COVID. We had an incident where an entire shift was out for a week. We worked overtime to fill the shifts and all that. And it's basically what you would have expected people that work on an ambulance would have to deal with day in and day out. And one thing I just wanted to call attention to also was the work that we did for administering the vaccine at the high school. And we were instrumental in getting that up and running. A lot of our members were there giving shots. We also did a lot of outreach into the community for in-calls, houses for elderly and disabled residents. And I don't know, I think I did a pretty good job of explaining what our risk and exposure was last time, getting dressed outside the house before going in and taking a shower before you could touch your kids, touch your family. A lot of us had pregnant wives at home at the time, just by happenstance. That was convenient. And just thanks again. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll say something real quick, if that's all right. My name's Jamie Yulee. I've been with the water department for about 10 years now. And one of the big things that, for me, with Reading is the community. And I think everyone, fire, police, water, sewer, parks, everyone goes above and beyond this town. And that's why I want to work for Reading. And I think that this whole community did a great job. And I think Alex brought up a lot of great points. Michael's brought up a lot of great points. Police and fire have. And I just wanted to outline a couple of things that we did that I know personally. I think everyone has kind of represented their department. We were in houses replacing valves, sewer backups, and that sort of stuff. I just kind of wanted to give you guys a background on, so you had an idea of why we were in and why it was essential. We would get calls, their sewer's not flowing. That's a scary thing. It's coming into their house. And I remember just being on call, hearing people, oh, you're really gonna be here in 10 minutes, that's great, because they had a lot of fear at that point. Is this service even available right now? And it was a good feeling that Reading provided that the whole time. I think this town does an awesome job, and that's all I have to say. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just lastly echo James' points that a lot of those guys didn't
sign up and didn't know that they'd be putting themselves at risk when they became a water foreman or a sewer laborer. And we learned pretty quickly that we were testing sewage to find out how much COVID was in it. And these guys were the ones that were treating the sewage and providing water all the time. And it was pretty apparent that COVID was in sewage, and you have to go into someone's backup basement and be the first responder essentially. So, again, thank you for your time. Michael might have some words, but it's been a pleasure.
Anybody else want to jump up before I wrap it up?
Can I just ask a question, and
Yeah,
this
any
is more just a
questions?
general question? The formulas are gonna come up with amounts, and I think if you've watched any of our meetings, we've wondered whether that something is a symbolic amount or a significant amount. And if the amounts vary, you know, when we're trying to have it in a set of objective criteria, like the months you were here, and trying to go with the spirit of ARPA with low and high, if those are the formulas we've done. But do you feel that all the people you represent understand that something may not be this mind-blowing amount of, oh, $3,000 or $5,000? It may just work out that some people are gonna get different amounts based on our formula, but that there's an intent behind it. Do they understand it? We don't want something to be symbolic, oh, you've only got $300 and someone got 1,000, and but you'll all understand that we tried to be objective with it on the
Yeah,
formula.
I guess
Based on
I
time.
don't wanna answer for the group, but for me, it's more important that, we don't pit people against each other, even
Sure.
in between divisions and departments. I don't wanna go to my desk on a Monday morning and the guy next to me says, you got 600, but I only got 400, like, what's up with that? You were here for 2 weeks, you know, and I was on vacation that week, like, that's, I think, the last thing that this group wants to do. So if it comes to the point where it's, you guys have said it, any amount is really awesome and met with sincere gratitude from all of us, and I would focus more on the intent than pitting people against each other and deciding that A was better than B.
Yeah, I think that was the whole point
And-
of them doing the formula, to
Yeah.
not do that. And then, you know, there's the thought of, well, let's just take everyone and give everyone the same amount, which also doesn't pit anyone, but doesn't recognize, okay, somebody was here
You're
more
in a very,
months.
you're in a very tough spot.
It's hard, there's
I-
different,
the
there's
fact-
different approaches.
like I said,
Different
the-
towns have done it a flat rate.
The fact that you got as far as you are and as close to the finish line in late August is wildly impressive.
It's not, wasn't even that much money. Go ahead, Michael, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I just want to.
Did anyone else want to answer that or jump in on that theme?
I just got one question. Who is it the board that is gonna decide what percent or what model we're going with, or how we're gonna determine those factors? If you said can be changed, how is that
I
gonna be
think we're
decided?
probably as a group gonna like vote on a model or pick something, but ultimately, we just recommend the select board has the final vote on our.
That vote's probably like September-ish or early October. Was that the timeline we're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to wrap it up. I don't know, we're gonna have one more meeting on September 6th for some other issues, and then I think, I hadn't thought past October 12th, unless, I think the select board wanted to wrap it up very soon. But I'd like to just check with my board, and also Andrew, does anyone here have any questions for the minutes?
Questions or answering that question?
Oh, yeah, you can answer too. I mean, I have,
And the official charge says that we're supposed to provide our recommendation to the select board in October.
Right. That's what I
It
had
could be
seen.
October 1st, it could be October 31st.
Right.
yeah.
I was just wondering if that was still the
Tentatively felt
general.
like October
Yeah.
12th.
That's good to hear.
You know, and I think in practice, the way it probably works out is that we recommend sort of a top-line number that fits within the scope of all the other recommendations that we're gonna end up making, and we'll recommend an approach, which likely will be
Approach
rooted
to
in one of these
developing.
models, right? Or, you know, or in an iteration of on one of these models, or maybe some entirely different approach potentially. But we'll recommend the approach and say, this is how we intend the 750, the 1 million, the 500,000, whatever that number is. This is how we intend for it to be allocated, but it'll be for the select board to make that,
Right, they
you
have
know,
the-
kind of final
they have the authority
determination.
to vote on
I'd
Yeah.
also just add one last point to your question on, is it too little or is it, all that? The answer for me is a clear no, and for another reason is, we all signed 3-year contracts like a year and a half ago, and when you go to the grocery store, your groceries are almost twice as expensive, and we're not eligible for raises off cycle, we're not eligible for bonuses, so any amount of money that comes, especially our union's way, would be met with open arms.
I think the intent is to be as fair as we can, and like half of the ARPA money has already been allocated to some things, and we're now all agonizing and on the rest, but we do recognize the spirit of how the money was granted to us as well. Does anyone else, Chris, did you wanna say something?
No, just thank you for everything that you did the whole time, and I've heard nothing but good things from various town employees and leaders, et cetera, in various departments, where nobody complained about anything. They just went to work, did your job, and, I mean, it could have been the easy way out to just be like, I'm gonna take a year or two off, kind of scenario, and it doesn't appear that really anybody in Reading decided to do that. So it goes to, I forget what glow vest person's name was, but it goes, yes, Jamie. It kind of goes to the spirit of what you said, like, you didn't sign up for any of this stuff, but you did, you went in, and, you know, no one thinks that the water department had to deal with sewer stuff like that, I had no clue. I know you deal with it, but I didn't know you came into people's houses and all that, like, so to hear that, you know, I just truly appreciate everything that you all did.
Yep. Anyone else have anything from the? So yeah, I think that's a good way to close. You know, we wanted to come here, kind of reiterate our position, why we think this is, you know, a reasonable request. It's really great to see the progress, and I think just kind of getting it a little bit more personalized, hopefully it really hits home and as we get closer to the finish line. So, like I said, I'm extremely proud to represent all of these workers, and thank you again to the board. So we appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you to all for coming, just like when we heard with a lot of the school units at our last meeting. I think hearing the actual experiences, like, that's all gonna stick with all of us.
Mhm.
It's just, 'cause we don't know all of the aspects of all your job. We know you were there, but hearing the interactions, for me, it was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, so, I'll just let them clear out of here. Thanks again, guys, ladies and gentlemen. So before we move back to the formula, I just wanted to, has the board had a chance to look at the packet? So for the person who wasn't here presenting, just to keep in mind another request, and I don't think we're making any decisions tonight. The public can see the packet on our webpage, but there was a request from the First Congregational Church of Reading for some allocations to compensate for, it appears to be some lost revenue during the pandemic, and to take care of some repair issues. So I expect that is what Reverend Aldridge is gonna speak to, and the bottom line amount was $34,000, so it's not a huge amount. But it's kind of on par with a lot of the outside of the town requests that we've gotten from different groups to keep in mind. And so Reverend Aldridge should be able to be hopefully at the next meeting, or someone to speak on behalf of that church. And as I mentioned at the start of the meeting, I'm gonna table the why discussion, but I had emailed John Fudo just to ask, would the why be able to handle concerns like Reading resident priority and ensuring that the money from ARPA is segregated in a way to stay at the Burbank branch? And he indicated yes to both. And so I'm sure he can speak to that further when he comes, but one of the things that he mentioned was and I've seen this in other communities, registration for programs would be like Reading residents first, leave it open a few weeks, then open it to others. So I think the concerns at RAC, some members had about just how it would work and ARPA money going first to Reading residents, they'll probably get addressed. So we'll hear more about that in their next meeting. So I guess, maybe since you had the spreadsheet, do you wanna talk, you wanna hear more from the group on it? And then, just quickly, Andrew, you had missed a meeting when we all initially gave our spreadsheet allocations for different categories. Did you want to speak tonight to any of your preferences in those categories? We didn't want to move beyond your perspective.
I did sort of get that spreadsheet, and I have filled it out, I could, sort of send it over to you guys, and get built into those, like, those sort of an average column. I didn't do any sort of outlier type things, so I think I'm probably in line with what other people have done.
Well, if you send it, we can discuss it on the 6th then, if you get it.
Yeah,
Okay, so we'll wait till then, but yeah, if there was some, I guess if you had some new ideas that we hadn't heard of or anything beyond what we had
no, I
considered.
mean, yeah, I think one of the big drivers is clearly how much you're gonna allocate to the hazard pay dictates how much you have left over for everything else and stuff, so.
Yeah, or Vice Chair Doxer isn't here today, he should be here on the 6th, and he kind of had the more significant outlier allocations, like a large amount for the senior center and stuff, and he
Yeah.
was maybe the only one with that.
I mean, Andrew, have you done it already, or is it still pending for you? You've done it, right? That's what it sounds like?
Well, I did fill out those things, but again, I sort of, how much do you have left over to allocate to different things?
You used more hindsight than we did because of now that you're
Yeah.
seeing where the premium
Yeah.
pay is going.
Yeah.
Well, one of the categories we all had that we were in sort of unanimous agreement on, that something should go, most of us were in agreement. Did you have anything? I didn't, my printout here.
No, I think some of the ones that are pretty, where we all agree, I agree, I didn't disagree with any of those.
Well, not
And
everything
there's
was
a couple of
unanimous.
things.
Like water and
Yeah, yeah.
sewer. What did you have for water and sewer?
$3 million.
So water and sewer, other than water reserves, I have 1.35.
Okay, I'm going by hand.
I have in line.
So you're in line with a lot of us, and then,
Yeah.
and what about the rec department? That was another one that most of us, like the recreation, the Birch Meadow project.
I said 1.5 on that.
1.5. Okay, I'm doing the hand updating for Thomas. And,
Do you want me to share it?
sure, because I don't have that spreadsheet up. All right, Tom Wise is gonna be, doing on-screen updating. Were there any ones in that first town category that, came up differently? I mean, I think we had, the Maya Soames is done, and
Yeah.
did you have additional money for elder services? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry,
Excuse me,
I'm not sure if you saw the
Andrew.
press release, we received $2.1 million grant.
So is the money coming back to ARPA then?
No. Thank you for the funding.
Okay.
We don't need the other 23,000 is what you're saying,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
So that gives 23,000 to some people back in their pools.
That was the state piece, right? And the federal piece is still pending?
Still pending.
Yeah.
No, I didn't see.
We do not need the other $23,000, if that's up for discussion.
Okay,
There were 5 people who had that in their bucket, so that gives 5 people $23,000 back.
okay, so that increases it. So under this first kind of subsection of town stuff, Andrew, were there any other inputs you would want to put down for getting the 23,000 for the Maya Soames land? And I think the community garden got a state grant, so I think we were
Took that out, yeah.
taking that out, but, like,
No,
Joe,
not in that section, and then, so I guess the next one is just the Historical Commission, Conservation Commission, Trails Committee.
Yep.
Those are all sort of fixed numbers. I guess Conservation had 23.5, that wasn't completely fixed, 11.6 for the trails.
Did you have 11.6 even or 11.62 like some of us did?
11.620.
did you have the historical commission the same amount, or was that 0?
Historical Commission, I had 13.5.
Okay. And then town forest, I think we already voted half of it already at the last meeting, so maybe that's just mooted. So nothing in the other categories?
No,
Because that was just left for,
yeah.
Did you put town forest up to the full 200 in your allocation, or do you leave it
No, I
with?
had the 100, I had the 100 on that.
Okay,
it's good to know. Sounds like you were unanimous with us in spirit. That's good.
Yep.
So then, the next thing, I guess, we can hear what you have to think maybe is a bottom line number, but everything's gonna be subject to our formula. If you look,
Right.
did you have any idea on a number?
A bottom line number for,
Like the total, on this page, the
hazard
line
pay.
40, the hazard pay. Some of us had 420, some of us had 1 million, some had 0. Did you have any?
no, that one I didn't see the numbers there. I guess it's sort of, it's way in the consider see, at least in the version I have, it doesn't show how much is left allocated.
So you just, it's kind of an it depends,
Yeah.
no number. That's understandable.
Yeah.
I think a lot of
Yeah,
us
I
may
think
be going that way.
I guess my main thought on that is, based on some of the stuff we've heard, and what I saw about the notes from the other meeting, which I apologize, I missed that, I was hiking the Canadian Rockies that week.
No,
No
I
good
knew you were
self-service.
traveling, that's okay.
I guess I'm starting to think of it not just as hazard pay, but there was, people not just in danger, but their whole jobs, the teachers, their jobs are just turned inside out from what they were supposed to be. We just heard about the sewer guys, I mean, there's so much stuff besides just the hazard side of it that I'm gonna have to sort of figure out.
Okay, well, that will continue in a little bit, and I guess maybe, I don't know if it's one of the last sections. We had I think we had some variation here, in this next section on some of our other requests. Did you have any thoughts with the chamber, Rotary, food pantry? And the food pantry kind of got updated on a couple of meetings when you weren't here, but maybe you caught up with the minutes to see what they were doing. If you had any
Yeah, I
thoughts.
haven't updated the whole spreadsheet to see on that. I definitely support the food pantry. I know that they have been hugely impacted by this whole thing.
Did you have an amount or,
No, I hadn't put an amount in there yet.
general?
So they asked for what,
I think it got, at the time this spreadsheet was done, it was 124, then they backed off, and what was it 84 at the last meeting?
yeah, we haven't updated it since then.
I'm sorry, the spreadsheet wasn't updated from the last meeting, but I'm just writing down your support. And the garden club, Rotary, chamber, if you had any thoughts, and that's okay, these are kind of,
yeah, I didn't really have to put in numbers for those guys.
that's okay.
So they're my highest priority, but
Yeah, and I think I think this is gonna become an area where we end up balancing some of these needs, and especially things that sound compelling, like the Burbank Y that's benefiting special ed kids and the food pantry, with what we've been hearing from all of the employees on town and school side. So
Exactly.
that's gonna be I think that's gonna be an interesting balance with all of us. Yeah, and then the end was just, member-initiated ideas, and really, the big ones. So, like, I had left money for other future ARPA needs, like not wanting to spend every bit of it. Mark had $1 million for the town. Elder Services, Sean, I think, had leaving some money left over too, but I didn't know if you had any of your own ideas or that we didn't cover.
no, I think that covers all the ideas I think that are out there.
Okay.
And I didn't put specific numbers on those just because I really feel like it's a balance against the employee pay side.
Right, and as we've learned more, some of us could even still change some of our ideas again.
Yep.
Thank you so much, though, for taking a few minutes here, because that helps kind of confirm. Did anyone else have any thoughts based on just going through? Go ahead, Joe.
I mean, just like, I don't know if this is, I gotta like redo like my numbers, but like I would move, I had like an extra 100,000 under, town forest, right? So I moved that to essential workers, cause I had 200,000 allocated, right? So
Yep.
only 100,000's really needed, right?
Yeah, and that could even, come up with town meeting later, I think it goes back a couple pages here.
And then I had another placeholder for, I think it was like 200 that I'd move over,
You had a
Human
placeholder
services.
up here, yep.
Yeah, so I'd move that to whatever you wanna call it, essential workers or premium. But one thing I did wanna bring up tonight is like, I was just thinking about, you know, the point about like coaches last week. And I don't know if that also would include like extracurricular or band or other people that helped with those activities that actually lost money. Like, we're talking about premium pay here, but like if we could work that into the model, I'd support that. And I don't think those numbers would be in there. I don't know if they're easy to attain, right? But I think like in fairness, like for, you know, we heard a great case for why we wanna compensate people, you know, with a premium pay, but, you know, people actually lost money and they stayed with probably these, you know, roles, right? So, I mean, I definitely think we should cover them, so, if we're gonna do something in this area.
So I think, yeah, I
And
know
I know it might
coaches
be-
and advisors were in person during the pandemic, because like my son was in marching band and they did things in the fall.
Yeah, and I'm sure
to the
they had to
extent
jump
could.
through hoops too, like, because the schedules are constantly changing, you know, they didn't know what type of, you know, there's a lot of wrinkles to their life too, right, you know,
Yeah,
so.
and Joe, I think the point was, you know, the stipends were adjusted by the number of games that were played in that season, but it probably doesn't actually impact the number of hours they spent with their team all
Yeah,
that much,
they
for
still made like a
instance, right?
commitment, like a
Yeah.
personal commitment,
Yeah.
right, and they
Yeah.
probably didn't know, the game's gonna get canceled the next day, or like whatever, coaching or band, or, I'm not sure exactly who fits in that umbrella and how big it is, but
I
my
think
guess
just,
is
I
we're
think
not
it's
talking about
just
a lot of
athletic
money.
coaches during that one season for the most part, right? that
No,
had
it was
stipends?
also extracurricular from a drama perspective. There were less
Oh,
shows
'cause the
and
number of
stuff
shows,
like
that's
that
right,
that
yeah.
happened, so.
Yeah,
But I mean, the population there is relatively small.
yeah.
The amount of the stipend is relatively small, but it certainly would fit into some of these conversations we had in the previous one.
Yeah.
Right, if we're talking about a $1,200 here and their stipend was $800 and it
Yeah.
became $600, there's
Yeah.
$200.
I don't think we're talking big money.
Yeah, we could
So-
probably
and I
make
think-
everybody in that group whole for south of $10,000, for
At
instance.
least make them whole, if
Yeah.
not, have, and then also have the other, like, I don't know if there should be a premium conversation there, but at least make them whole, you know what I mean, so.
Yeah, I mean, the teacher's contract has a lot of lists of stipends, but not all, and so a lot of them are existing staff that do this as something extra, but not all. I know some of the sports team, well, certain people that, I guess the ones that weren't teachers were paid by boosters. And I don't know what, that's
Well, I
kind
mean,
of
what-
outside of ours.
That's outside of what we do anyway. That's not paid for by the town in any way, shape, or form. But the contract does have the specific, you know, head coaches of different seasons, of different teams, you know, and in some cases, assistant coaches of different seasons of different teams, depending on the team. Also has varsity versus junior varsity versus freshman or things along those lines. But oftentimes, you'll see the boosters raise additional money for some of the assistant coaches or secondary coaches at the lower levels.
So I think the hard thing becomes, though, on top of you getting the salary information, is then saying, okay, which activities still happened in which month during COVID? We may be able to get that information, but it might be
We-
harder. It's probably a little more discreet. I mean, there's, you know, a dozen teams, band, drama, like, some discreet people to ask.
We should be able to run down which stipends were modified. And
Well,
then,
yeah,
and
I
then
guess who pays the stipend? Somebody in the central
out of the-
office?
Well, most of them come out of the revolving.
revolving accounts, yeah.
So there, you have your data. You should
Yeah,
just get us-
and then we just need to think through, do those all make sense to make whole, or did some of those things, you know, not happen, and so the stipend wasn't paid as a result, you know, that sort of thing, right? So, and-
Well, like if you saw a stipend, if you could compare the union contract, you know what the stipend's supposed to be.
yeah,
And then the reduced stipend, so that means it happened, but happened to a lesser degree. Or did people get stipends anyway, even if something was all virtual? I don't know.
We'd have to work it through.
yeah,
And
it's-
see what
there's
data
probably a
is
few
available.
different, it probably gets a little bit complicated, but it is, again, a small number of, it's a relatively small number of people impacted by that, so we could probably work through those almost on an individual level. Just a general comment, you know, it feels like there are a lot of line items here, particularly those that are, say, south of $100,000, where 6, 7, maybe all of us have agreed to some floor of support. You know, it might be the full ask, it might be some slight haircut. Joe doesn't like the parking lot, for instance, you know, but is fine with everything else, you know, that sort of thing. And at the end of the day, I think we're probably left looking at, 4 or 5 of these lines where there's sort of a lot of disconnect, or a lot of debate at this point. And in particular, it feels like our big trade-offs are between what we want to do for water sewer reserves and what we want to do for premium pay.
Do you want to have that discussion without Mark here, or he should be here on Tuesday, or is someone not going to, Tuesday the 6th, or? how do we wanna do
I'm
that?
just making an observation, or
Yeah.
maybe a suggestion for how to approach our next discussion on this, which is, I think we are close to being able to close some of these things out, which
Right,
we should,
once
we
we
probably should wait
resolve
for Mark
that.
for. So maybe a next step is, if we, I know I need to take another spin through my submissions, because I held things that now I know I don't need to hold, or I just have changed my opinion about something slightly. Not radical changes, to the bottom line number, but, I'd like to revise mine, and, maybe then we compare notes and see if there's a line item where we're all in agreement on 31.5, let's put that up for a vote and check it off and move on.
But we should still do the what if, though, given it sounds like a lot of us maybe, this, like, I came in less than some other people on premium pay, and in my mind, I'm moving up. I have to see, well, if we start looking at all these 30K easy yeses and everything, what does that, do you want to say, what does that leave us for premium pay? Do we want to establish, okay, this amount should be premium pay, and all the other numbers need to be scaled to fit that? It kind of,
I think for something, so take,
like the chamber, I think that they're, it's
so
not an exact.
so let's take trails, right, where
Trails,
we
okay.
are unanimous at 11,620. If we come back next time and you're saying 500,000 and I'm saying 1 million and Tom's saying 900 for premium pay, but we all have 11,620, then it almost doesn't matter where we net out on premium pay. We've found space for 11,620 collectively, right? We've prioritized that, collectively. So, when I say check it off and move on, it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to finalize that as a recommendation to the select board, but let's start creating a list of these are the things that we believe we are going to fund and at what level, and here's what that leaves us collectively, and now how do we feel about premium pay versus water reserves versus the other 3 or 4 smaller things that maybe we're all still considering a little bit.
Yeah. And Tom, you had your hand up?
This is where Sean and I are wonderful, because we're opposites in many ways.
I wasn't gonna say that was wonderful. I was hoping you were about this.
This is where we sharpen each other sometimes. I'm on the opposite side of it from that perspective. I think we should look at the big ticket items and say, how much of the big ticket items do we think we need to fund? And then those other ones are relatively low-hanging fruit that could be done other ways, in many cases, right? So is it appropriate for us to finally agree on what we want to do for Birch Meadow? Right, we're pretty close to that, but if everybody comes to a number, whatever that number is, that impacts all their other allocations, right? So if we make if everybody gets to 1.5, let's just say for sake of argument, looking across the board, we're pretty close to that, then that impacts, in my case, I have to find $75,000 somewhere else, right? And that might be that my lower priority is now gonna say, well, Trails is gonna lose a little bit, and something else is gonna lose a little bit, or I may just say, well, that comes off of premium pay, but if you start at the top and say, what are the big ticket items that we feel like are the most strategic investments of the town, and those are the things that we should be spending this money on, then the other things kind of trickle in play. That's my perspective on how we should address these.
So from this end, and also Andrew, but Chris has his hand up, and then I'll see if anyone else.
I think, I agree with Tom, but in addition, I think that we should just come back on the 6th with our formulas revised and just pre-hashed it out with what we already did kind of scenario. Meaning, we're gonna come in, my water rates are not gonna be 0 potentially next time around, and then we can go from there. Otherwise, we don't know where we're at, we're just gonna be talking about what ifs in numbers. Why don't we on the 6th just come up with, here is our final allotments, because we heard from pretty much everyone other than the one from earlier today. I don't see what's gonna be changing, we just come up with the numbers then, and then just go from there.
Marianne, is it possible to get an update on the amount request? I've lost track of some of these, frankly, on the amount requested column. I don't know if you have a better grasp on it than I do at this point, but for instance, now we don't need 23,000, like, that makes sense, but I hadn't really thought of it, right? So I probably would have come back next week with 23,000 in there if somebody hadn't made that comment
So I'll
today,
have to,
so.
I can try to get that with Jackie and send out the board. I can get with, if you can send Jackie and I, Tom, what you
Mhm.
inputted from Andrew, because Jackie had, I have a version as well, but that way, without getting to open meeting, Jackie can send it out to all of us, but I'll have to give her some if you send it to me, I can get in the edits about what has already been allocated, and like now that, with the Soames press release, I would guess I would be throwing in, I think the last release that's come into us, the 34K that I mentioned from the church, where you can read in the packet what it's all about, and they wanna present. But, you know, even the small items do add up and could swing like 200K either way on the, 1 to 200K, I should say, on the premium pay. So it's something, I guess I'm inclined to think like Tom, if we start with the big items, some of the smaller items could come from other places. Though someone might say some of the bigger items could come from other places. For example, you know, the recreation, we could do some of the projects and then they're still on the capital plan. They're coming from another place. So I think we're probably in closer agreement, most of us are in closer agreement on that.
Yeah, part of that, I mean, that was
Yeah.
one of Mark's point, was that it's gonna be easier to ask town meeting for one big number than 5 or 6 little things that we didn't get to. If we do the big things and we leave all of the little things undone, it's gonna be hard to say, oh, we want 10,000 for this and 30,000 for this. But I don't know how to weigh those things, particularly in light of the fact that town meeting actually did voted, how to, spend ask the select board to put a lot of ARPA money towards the water tower.
Right, but I think as I alluded to, even at FinCom, town meeting made that vote with certain information in front of us, which was, this is how we have to spend the ARPA money. And we did not have the flexibility, they gave a couple of
Yeah.
months later, but that point is taken.
Nor did town meeting have the sort of laundry list of very reasonable and viable projects that, have popped up since then, right? So, a lot of these we knew, but, I don't think town meeting,
Well, town meeting
Was
gave us,
considering
what
$1 million
Chris
in
said it's
premium
up to,
pay.
so they gave us
yeah,
flexibility.
yeah. I'll be honest, I don't feel that strongly whether we start from the big ticket or the smaller items. I think my broader point is, it feels like we need to take another run at updating our personal sort of rankings or allocations. And when we get to a place where we see some areas of strong overlap, I think we should start having a straw man to work from and figure out where what's left and where the real disagreements lie. And it doesn't commit us to, as a group, coming back and saying, oh, we should dial that big ticket item down by 100,000 because we really do want to fund these other 3 or 4 things. It doesn't preclude us from doing that, but we just need a starting point. We need somewhere to start and kind of a cohesive approach to checking things off.
I mean, just looking at the asks, right, so even forgetting, like, if I look at the private and community requests, and I'm realizing, my food pantry number would need to be updated down, but the bottom line number could be moot, right, if you say, well, let's put the church request back in, and that's 34,000. So right away, the communities, the small request, I mean, that's $362,000. Think about what that would mean on the premium pay, swinging the premium pay either way. They're small numbers. If you go back, and I'm just working for paper because it's easier to me, the town boards, Historical Commission, Conservation Commission, Trails, and I guess it becomes smaller without town forest. That's only 56,000 if you take out town forest. That seems much easier, that would not impact premium pay as much. There's only a few there, and, under 60,000, I think. So, and we were all consistent on those, so like you said, Sean, those may be the ones that we could even all agree on, and it still wouldn't impact our big ticket numbers because the amounts are so low.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that sorry, go ahead, Tom.
I was gonna say, I think we're circling around this, right? I mean, I think what I hear almost in unanimous agreement across the board is that we need to all do our updates. We're in short order, because September 6th is, less than 7 days away, right? But also, we need to make sure the amount requested in each column is correct versus the current ask, right? So, for example, the Birch Meadow one still says 1.75, but it's 1.5 is the most recent ask. The food pantry, has come back again with a different ask, with a different focus. So what is that ask? Let's assume that's their best and final ask, and let's make sure that's the number that's in this sheet, so people know what they're actually going against. Anything, Fidel, that we don't need anymore, I would like to have those crossed off as well, right? Because we've already funded it in one way, shape, or form, and we can cross them off, so people don't get confused and we don't get, in this game
Well,
of,
we can make sure they're just removed from the spreadsheet too, because then the numbers, just delete the line and then the numbers go out too.
yeah, you can do whatever you want to do it, but I think we're all, what I'm hearing is, people want a chance to resubmit, but we want to resubmit with the most recent and best information, and then from there, we may have some coalescing, and what you have to decide, whether you want to start from the bottom or the top, as part of the conversation to get us to final agreements.
You mean bottom, top, you mean like the small numbers
Small
versus
versus
the
big numbers, yeah.
So, I guess I'd like a sense on the board. Maybe this is not any kind of an official vote of what we're gonna do, but, I'll just call it without thumbs up or thumbs down. It won't be a vote. How many people feel
You
more?
don't, I mean, you're talking about sort of how we conduct our business, not a deliberation on something,
Right,
so
no, I'm
it's
just
fine, you
trying
don't
to
have
get a
anything to worry
sense
about.
of how many
OML
people
worry about it.
feel
You don't have any
like
OML
starting
issues,
with.
yeah.
Pardon me?
You don't have any
You don't have any
issues
OML or
you wanna
posting
have.
issues or anything,
Right.
'cause it's just about how we deliberate,
No,
it's fine.
So it's just kind of an issue of, how many people wanna start with the big numbers first? Can I do a roll call on that? So I'll start with Andrew. Do you wanna start big or small?
I'm a little confused as to exactly what that means by big or small.
Finalizing,
Isn't this largely driven by, what we have to allocate to big versus small? It's driven by what we decide to do with employee pay.
well, then you're just saying big, because I guess we have to define big, right? So maybe big is anything,
I think big is
500,000
generally
or
water,
more.
sewer, rec, and premium pay, like, for the most part, your three buckets
so do
that
we
were
wanna start
in the
with
big category.
the big categories first and then allocate and finalize those? Or would you prefer, let's find the easy, small numbers?
Not to debate this all night, but
Yeah.
another wrinkle, like, I'd rather focus on the must-have priorities. Like, in my mind, I'd like to make sure that, like, some money gets allocated to my must-haves, just personally. I don't know
Yeah,
how
I
you
mean, I
usually
guess
do that.
we're coming down to
You know,
what
and make sure that we go through those
personal
first.
must-haves, but I guess, I think.
But I think we could agree quickly on, like, some of the must-have priorities, and there's some things that are, like, a couple that only have
The
one or
big
two.
must-haves or the little must-haves, that's what I'm trying to start with.
No,
Yeah, I think,
across the
I think
board.
the real challenge is that the big
Yeah.
ones, we may all agree they're must-haves or they're not,
Yeah.
but they can all be flexed up and down, right? The
Yeah.
amount we do to water and sewer could, Fidel would love for us to give him $1.3 million, but he's not gonna
I
turn
think
down
he said
100,000. Yeah, whatever number, he's not gonna turn it down, right? Same thing for rec, like, we could partially fund that project, and then there's only a remainder left to ask it for a town meeting, and obviously
Yeah.
premium pay, we could dial up and down, so,
I guess I was
Yeah.
just saying, like, if there's some small, even a small must-have, and we all agree, just cross that off the list, and that money comes off the top. Rather than, I hate to see, like, some of the small items just never get funded, right? Because, again, it's hard to bring them to town meeting, and collectively, we said, oh, this is money
Well,
that
some
we
may
should,
never get to town meeting because they're private requests, like, I don't think
yeah.
the food pantry can go to town meeting, or the
Yeah.
chamber could go to town meeting.
So-
The food pantry's getting a grant somewhere else, right? So
Right.
that's part of the question as well, right? So there's different ways that things can be funded as well.
and then, that point, Joe, is part of what, part of why, Mary Ann, I'm kind of the opinion that it really doesn't matter if we start with the big stuff or start with the little stuff, because if we start with the big stuff, and I know that I wanna reserve for 5 of the smaller things that are really important to me, that's gonna influence how much I'm willing to support in the big ones, right? You know, so I think that's just the nature of the beast, is if we just pick a starting point, we'll start forcing ourselves into some real decisions.
Just to, I mean, Chris's hand's up first. Go ahead, Chris.
I'm not gonna,
Yeah, I think just, the only thing I would caution you there, Sean, is, even though I want to start with the big ones, is if we get to a point where we as a group are saying, okay, you know, I'll just say water and sewer for the sake of argument right now, right? 6-2, 1.35 for water, and you've left $1 million for something else, that means you have to adjust on the fly that $1 million in some way, shape, or form, because it's out of the realm for you now, right? And that's another reason why potentially starting high is actually a good thing, because then you can say, okay, these are the big ones, and I call it strategic, Joe, as opposed to must-haves. These are the ones that strategically we as a town want to address as the biggest, most important items that are out there. I'm still struggling, I'll put this out there as well, that some of these small ones can't just find a way into the regular budget throughout the week, throughout the year. Now, I know the community requests can't, right? But trails and forests, find a way we'll put into Chuck's budget for next year. It's $11,000, right? Whatever the other ones are, there should be ways to get them into the greater budget as well without having to worry about special appropriations at town meeting. If you can't, then a special appropriation at town meeting may come. But if some of them can fit into the greater $102 million budget that we have as a town.
Chris, go ahead.
Thanks, Marion. I'll just circle back to what I said. We should all just come back with what we have for figures. I think instead of big, small, et cetera, we just go from the top of the document right down to the bottom. If we all match in the first 7 numbers, we all match. That number is not changing. How could it? So just put a period and move on. I'm not saying vote on every single one all in a row like that. I think that we have to have another discussion with everything all condensed into one, and then a vote on the following thing. It might come down to 6-2 to give water and sewer, $1.5 million, and then some people lose out on the number and things have to be adjusted. But for the most part, that's just the way that I think that we should just go. Start at the top, go down to the bottom, just put all our figures. If we're unanimous, we're giving 24 grand to this, then it's 24 grand. If it's 1.5 million, it's 1.5 on the other ones. And then it doesn't matter about big and small, it's just we're gonna go through the whole list. Here it is, see where we're all at, how things are gonna shake out, and then subsequent meeting, we just vote on it all and see where it lands. All it is a recommendation.
Okay, anyone else?
I guess
Go ahead, Andrew.
part of the thing that will drive this is I'm very curious to see the employee pay model, because how much I allocate to that, I'd love to be able to see, okay, if we allocate X amount, then these, and be able to play with the numbers and say, I think these people would deserve, if it comes down, it's only gonna be $20 for somebody who I think deserves a lot more than that, I might allocate more to the employee pay side. I don't know that I'm really thinking of it in terms of just, employees deserve $1 million or whatever.
Well, one of the concerns I have is, say we come up with it with a model, and then we say to the select board, and let's just pick your 750 number, okay, out of all of our recommendations, we say 750 for premium pay. Does that bind all the units on dividing it the way we say?
Absolutely not, I don't think we bind anybody on anything.
So
It's
we're,
not the units who are paying, it's the town and the schools that are paying.
Yeah.
so,
It's a recommendation to the town and the schools about how to pay out based on the
right,
model.
and they may do that, or they may not do that, right?
We can always make it contingent.
They should follow the guidance,
Yeah,
I would rather Tom involved, I would rather blame Tom than me, so.
Tom's model, yeah.
well, I think they wanna know that it was done fairly, and we have it sounds like,
They should just watch back the first 5 minutes of the meeting here tonight and just see that, a lot of time and effort and thought went into this, even though it seemed like it was the night beforehand. still, I mean, it doesn't appear that way to me. It's a ton of work that went into that formula. I saw on one of the examples, I never would have thought cafeteria workers were getting $12.85. I understand that there's some other unions or whatever that aren't in that model, but when I saw that number, I was comfortable knowing that other ones were gonna be higher than that. If the cafeteria one was $75 when he ran that formula like that, I would have been like, you're out of your mind that anyone's getting $75. But seeing that, I mean, it seems like a reasonable thing. We haven't got into the weeds of which model, which number, et cetera, but seeing that as a rough example, I mean, seemed reasonable. I mean, I don't know if anyone disagrees with that being reasonable, but that's how it was for me.
I mean, I guess I'm gonna trust whatever model they come with that we agree on, and for me, it's the bottom line number. That somehow, I know this number will get divided up fairly.
Yeah, I mean, just to give people a sense of it, you know, if, at like a 750,000 total appropriation, if you use Model 1, you're generally seeing payouts at the individual level, assuming somebody was on the payroll during the entire period. You're generally seeing payouts in the 750 to 1,500 range if you're in that like sort of plus or minus 20% or plus or minus 30% differential sort of approach. You know,
What
so.
about the other model? Is it a broader range?
I mean, it depends on how tight or how aggressive a differential we apply for the community contact factor, yeah. But you could scale it from there, right? You know, you might see payments in the $300, $400, $500 range for people that had very little community contact in their role, and you might see, you know, payments north of 2,000 for people that had very high community contact in that case. So that's the sort of the ballpark that we're in, at say 750,000, for example, as an allocation.
And that's also before we get the rest of the union numbers
Right.
in this spreadsheet. So once we get that in, then we have a better picture of what the ballparks are gonna be, and it's probably gonna adjust down. You know, we have, I think, most of the unions covered at this point, the bigger ones for sure.
Yeah.
You know, we have the little ones left behind, so we're gonna have, you know, somewhere in the range of 400 to 1,600 probably when it all bakes out, most likely. But this body will have to say, what are we comfortable with, which model, A or B, 1 or 2? And then, once we make that decision, what inputs do we want to put into it as our recommendation?
That's why with the 750 in that example there, that's almost the average of all of us, right? Wasn't it 717 or something?
Yeah, the spreadsheet, it
Oh,
was
but it
kind
didn't
of,
have.
our
Andrew's number.
average was 600 without Andrew's amount. And his was, it depends.
And then
So our
Joe's
average,
just
I'm
went
sorry,
up.
our average was $599, okay, on July 14th. Mark and I were at the low end, the rest of you were 750 or greater. So if
But
Mark
Joe
and I,
just-
Yeah, but I mean, directionally, you're probably
yeah,
right. It's
0.
probably somewhere between 700 and 800,000, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Joe's already said, you know, he's freed up some dollars in his mind now, and Andrew's obviously in a similar position. So, I mean, directionally, it's probably the range we're in, 700 to 800.
I guess I just look at that and I'm trying to like take out, you know, just doing math in my head here. If we have roughly 3.5 million left and we ought to have that amount firmed up, and you start taking out, you know, a million for water, 1.5 million for rec, that's 2.5, that leaves 1.5, and now you're taking half of that on premium pay, 750, so that maybe leaves 700 to 750 for all the other things. That feels like I'm forgetting something, that seems like too much left for all the other things, but maybe you can do it all.
I think you're at more like 250,000 left using those examples. You said 1.5 million.
If I say, yeah,
$1 million for water and sewer, 1.5 million for rec, and 750 for premium pays 3.25. So that would leave you with about a quarter, maybe 300,000.
so
I don't know exactly where.
250K left, so then that,
Yeah, I mean, so
then
we're,
everything else has to just,
we're in
scale
range,
down,
right? I mean,
yeah.
we're in range. We're at a point where we're discussing, are we comfortable only funding 250 to 300,000 of the other things? Do we have, you know, do we want to scale up or down some of those larger requests to accommodate more? Do we want to, you know, adjust more for premium pay? What do we want to do? We're in that range. We just need to all tighten up our numbers, I think.
we can choose what to flex as well. It's possible we could say, well, I'm gonna make Fidel a little unhappy. Let's go with, 900,000 for, water and sewer, and let's update the premium paid 850,000, right? As we go through this, that's all part of this, as we look at the overall numbers that are coming through the formula in the spreadsheet, as we look at how everybody's feedback goes in, that's perfectly doable.
Yeah,
But at least everyone sees the averages that are in here now to realize that you can't go 100 grand on premium pay on September 6th. Like, that's not gonna work since 8 other people are roughly around 700,000 or
Right.
whatever. So there's, when everyone's factoring in their numbers, they kinda have to just realize that, you might have done X, Y, Z. I'll use the water as the example. Like, Mark and I are both zeros. So obviously, that number has to move differently. So,
Yeah. We're allowed, we have an agenda item around continued allocation discussion, so I want to just, Chris, play off of what you just said. Of all the requests that are in here, of all the things, I'm sorry, Fidel, you're not gonna like this. The water and sewer piece is an inherently regressive thing, right? It disproportionately benefits people with high water usage and high property tax bills, essentially, right? And so.
does it though?
Yeah, right, because what
We
you're.
all use water though.
We all use water, but rates are determined by the volume that you use.
But it isn't only for rates.
I know.
Repairs.
But that's why I'm saying it's some combination of those two things, right? Essentially like your contribution as a property owner to things that come out of property taxes or are are sort of inherently a regressive thing, right? Where disproportionately you're benefited if you have a larger, more valuable home. Similarly, the things that are driven by rates, or things that are funded by rates, are usage driven, and so there's a regressive angle to that as well. It's not a perfect correlation, but there's a regressive angle to that. So when again, just thinking about the original intent of this, and I know that water and sewer, infrastructure projects and so forth were on that list. The intent, I think, is to help the communities, the people, the individuals, the organizations, et cetera, that were impacted the most is an intent we all seem to think was a valuable one. I am not in a place where I'm, we'll see how the vote goes when we get there, but I'm not in a place where I think it makes sense to throw large amounts of money at things that are sort of more regressive. I'd rather hold more for premium pay and fund the rec complex that's gonna benefit, everybody in town and is a free service for everyone than do something that's gonna disproportionately benefit people with large homes and that sort of thing, so.
Is there a thought down here?
I hate to be the broken record, but I
Okay.
gotta do this. So so one, I agree with you if you look at it on a flat rate, right? Because at a flat rate, you're right. Everyone is treated the same, right? I think we made a commitment as a board and a staff that we're going to go to tiered rates,
Yep.
right? This year in particular is going to be important to be able to hold us as tight as possible, because we're basically going to stretch, right? The lower usage is going to go low, right? So it's potential that the lowest rate will get a decrease, right, in next year, but stretching means that the high rate is going to get very, very high,
Yeah.
right? So if we can't supplement that stretch, right, on implementation, that band is going to be very, very wide, right? So this coming year in particular, supplementing this really structural shift is going to be critical, and I do agree with you that a single tiered rate is regressive, but implementing tiered rates is the way to implement equity into water rates, right? And there in the NWRA network, there's 6 communities left that have a single tiered for this reason, right?
Yeah.
You want to incentivize and maybe charge less to those lower use, lower, lower tiered, people, right? The, and I mean, the, earlier in this process, I mentioned that we as a town, are the third highest water and sewer rates, in the MWI network, right? I think that is, you know, for a number of reasons, but, you know, I think holding the line as long as possible kind of brings us down, right, from the top rates to more in the middle of the pack, right? The other communities are not doing this. Their increases are continuing. So we are buying ourselves. It's essentially a few years of holding the rates as long as possible. And I think that what we are going to implement with tier rates is really going to flip that notion on its head.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm very, very supportive of tiered rates, I think, as you know, but my, you know, if somebody told you you had to find another $1 million of revenue in the water fund next year, right? That's not all gonna accrue, and that million could come in the form of getting or not getting $1 million from us, essentially, right? That $1 million is not all gonna accrue to that top tier, you know what I mean? Like, I would assume that all the tiers, you know, all the tiered rates sort of shift up and down, right? Most of the water consumption in town, you know, because of the way that the tiers are gonna be constructed, most of the water consumption in town is still gonna live in the bottom two tiers, not in that highest tier, right? That, you know, I mean, the heaviest users on a per capita basis might be much higher, but definitionally, most of your, you know, probably 80% of your consumption is gonna come from the first couple of tiers, and then that incremental, you know, third tier is whatever, the last 20%, you know, for example. So you can't make up that $1 million by only throwing it at the top tier, I don't think. And so you know, so again, like all of the rates, you know, not to use a water analogy, but like all the boats are gonna rise or fall a little bit on some level is how I would imagine that plays out. I mean, if you're saying otherwise, if you're saying that like the commitment is to hold the lowest rate at something at or below our current rates, and we'll just find the money elsewhere, then that's great, you know, but it doesn't feel like that's
I think we'll be
realistic.
having the same conversation that we had about essential workers pay, right? Like who deserves better, who, you know, who, and I'm not saying that it's going to be an easy conversation. It is absolutely possible to peg the lowest tier, you know, at a 0% increase, right, and toggle the higher ones, right? I mean, it's possible, because when you set the rates, you set it by tier. I'm not saying that's what we're going to do.
Right.
But it is possible to do that, right? But I assume that if I'm a select board member, I'm gonna want to know who's in that tier, right? And you know, if in the top tier is Home Depot, I'm like, pass it on, right? If the top tier, if in the top tier it's, you know, is a low income senior building, right? It might have a different spin on it, right? So it's not going to be an easy decision, but we will have the ability to do that. And it's not to say that you know that all tiers will get 3%, you know, increase. It is possible to set the lowest one, you know, to use your spreadsheet analogy, right? That at a -20. Right, the middle tier at a 0, and the top tier at a 20, right? So by creating tiers, it allows us the flexibility of doing this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't disagree. Conceptually, we could you know, the select board could allocate all of whatever, you know, sort of revenue shortfall there is to the top tier if they want to do it conceptually. I just, in practice, it feels like the approach you just described, right? You've got some baseline rate, and then you've got a lower tier rate and a top tier rate that are, you know, a differential off of it, or however you think about it. All of those are gonna move up or down to some degree based on what the number is that you're trying to achieve from a water revenue perspective, I would think. I would think, you know, you know, that's kind of what I'm getting at here is money that we allocate in this way isn't necessarily flowing to the people that need it most. I get that it's flowing to everybody, and there's some benefit to that, and there's some goodness to that, but it's not necessarily flowing even proportionally, let alone disproportionately, to the people that need it the most, potentially, so.
It sounds like you're trying to apply the premium pay approach to the water and
It's,
scale everything based on.
yeah, I mean,
assets and
it's
income
similar to
and
premium
it's-
pay in the sense
it's-
that was like sort of the tenor of how to think about ARPA, right? Like, in the original guidance on ARPA, which was like, you're trying to help the people that suffer, that suffered the most.
But I think the original guidance might have just said, well, it recommended things like, cable infrastructure and water sewer infrastructure, because I don't know that it was trying to get regressive. It was saying everyone inherently benefits from those things, and maybe lower income communities need to shore it up. I don't know that they were also trying to, and you and I can just disagree, like they were trying to also say, well, not only water and sewer infrastructure, but let's also favor the poorest people paying the rates versus the larger. I'm oversimplifying your
Yeah.
complicated discussion. It feels like we're just getting a little beyond the scope of what this group.
I would agree with that. I would agree. I think this is getting beyond the scope of the ARPA committee to debate how we should set that water rates.
Yeah, thank you.
No, yeah, I mean, so I agree. I'm not telling Fidel how to set the water rates. What I'm saying is there are practical implications to how the money that we allocate gets used. It's a very clear line of sight for who benefits from almost every other dollar that we're allocating here. We know exactly who it is that benefits. In this case, we're forecasting future decisions the select board will make about how to set their rate tiers and hoping or assuming that it benefits the people that we'd like to see benefit, right?
I guess just before first Tom goes, can I just understand, was this, I didn't think this water and sewer money was only gonna be supplementing rates.
Yeah,
I thought there were
That's where my
water
answer is gonna
capital,
come from,
Yeah,
right?
that's why I want to
capital
clarify that,
projects, and I
so-
heard, the
Yeah.
water main work you guys did in the last week, a couple of old things broke, like, I thought those were the kinds of things it was going to. And Tom, you can speak, and Fidel, you can answer, I guess.
Well, that was exactly what my point was gonna be. This is a capital spend because we
Yeah.
know that there are portions of our water infrastructure that need dire attention. It just so happens that part of that comes through the water and sewer funds. And that's where we're talking about rates as well, but this is a capital spend. We shouldn't be talking about it as a rate deferral or anything else along those lines. It just so happens to lead that way. But we have a large chunk of capital spend to do in this place. So if we don't put it from ARPA, then we're gonna go to town meeting and asking for, large chunks of money to fix this. So
And I'll
Yeah.
just remind everybody that I started the discussion by saying people who pay have high water usage or have high property tax bills are the ones that disproportionately
We're
benefit.
all gonna benefit,
right?
though, if a water main, what broke this week? There was stuff that broke this week, you can explain.
All through Main Street, so yeah, no,
A bunch of stuff
absolutely.
broke, right?
So, yeah,
How much is that gonna cost us?
$1.35 billion.
what I requested for FY '23 was $650,000, and it was capital things that were projected to be done already, and they were going to be borne by the enterprise budget, right? So it's either we use ARPA or we increase the rates, right? I mean, so what we're trying to do is basically do that for one more year, hopefully 2 more years, right? By paying for capital expenses in cash, it reduces the burden on the enterprise, thus reducing the burden on the rates.
I see.
Do you have a question, Andrew?
Joe.
No, yeah, I get it now. Those were my questions. I was just trying to reconcile how it's in the spreadsheet, because it does talk about both, like, the water rates, but also the 1.3 describes like water capital projects.
Right.
Essentially, it is funding water capital projects, but also not
That helps
impacting.
the
the
Instead of
rates, right?
having to
So-
charge the ratepayers for the
Yeah.
water capital projects. 'Cause we already-
Instead of having to take a loan out, right, or do a bond thing to pay for that, which then we have interest that goes back into that water, that we have to pay over a long period of time as well, so it has to be paid in some way, shape, or form. We have a bucket of money now that can pay for it, so we don't have to, go and take a 6%, what's the bond rate set right now, Fidel, right? Loan out to do that work. The work has to be done. So
Well,
no choice, no problem.
In addition to the town meeting vote, which didn't have all the other considerations,
Huh?
the
No,
survey
sorry.
data did support this as well. We can't forget that we also did a survey, the survey data also supported the recreation spend. But both of those are clearly spends that, you know, you can go to town meeting for. There's other ways to go, but I think we all agree that something should go there. So I guess, are we saying then, since Mark isn't here too, that we want to finalize where we stand on things on the 6th? And it's okay if we actually get out before 9:30 today. Every meeting doesn't have to run super late.
Yep.
But,
I second that
what do you
motion.
guys anticipate would happen differently on your formula? Do you have more to say about your premium pay formula? Because it seems like we may be in agreement on a number. Are there things that have to change a lot? It sounds like you,
I think the dependencies right now that are left, the formula itself is fine. We can just, if we want to tweak it or add to it, we can do that if we want to. But I think both models work reasonably well. I think that this group just has to choose. Do you want the, you know, pay scale one only, or do you want the pay scale and the risk one combined, right? So that's what this group has to define. And if there's a third one we want, then let's talk about that, because we could probably build it without too much trouble. So that's one thing. This group has to decide which one they want. The second thing is we still need the rest of the HR data to support it for some of the other unions and the rest of the town staff. We have some overall town staff numbers, but I want to build it the same way I built the stuff for the schools, so we have month by month pieces of information based upon the employees and whether they're part-time or full-time and all that stuff. So those will adjust the inputs as well.
but those won't change the decision of pay scale or pay
No.
scale plus risk.
It'll just change how much people get as a result, right? So we just have to decide as a group, do we want to do pay scale or pay scale plus risk? And then depending on that one, what are the levers we want to pull? What differential number do we want to apply? And or what risk reward do we want to apply as
Go
well?
ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so not to, I don't wanna make this more complicated, but that point that came up tonight around full versus part-time, and there seemed to be, you know, some concern, right, about like how you really bifurcate, and it may not be, I don't know, like, do you wanna do a version where you assume all full-time or not? Or have that as a factor, or debate that, I guess.
Can you bring up the assumption page that you started off with?
Yeah,
There are
sure.
a couple of things in there, like the full-time versus half.
Cause right now you're assuming like, for each category, full versus, like,
So
Well, the full-time
Full-
person would have if they're both doing the same job, they'd have double the contact, right? If we were looking at risk.
full-time versus part-time is just an employee categorization. Are
Can
you
share the
working?
screen, I think?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I didn't start sharing it. Are you working 20 or less hours, or are you working 20 or more hours? Right? That's all that is.
Okay.
It's not me saying, you know, they worked a portion of a month or not a portion of a month.
Okay.
There is the category and the structure in the model to allow for that, which is the in-person work status. So Joe, you might be asking that question.
yeah, I think that's a better way to ask it, yeah,
Right.
because that was the point, like, because someone, like, when they had alternate shifts, right, and they couldn't be all, like, you know, working together at the same time, right?
Right, so, and that is something, you know, we list here as something that still needs to be firmed up, and or if this board says, we don't wanna worry about that, then yes, that can be Model 3. that
Would you
says-
say the lowest paid employees tend to be a lot of them are part-time? Like, I don't know, a lot of our paras, I think, are a lot of them part-time, and, I mean, I don't know if the cafeteria workers are part-time, I was just,
There's a lot of
thinking-
cafeteria workers that are part-time. There's not a lot of paras that are part-time, because
Okay.
the actual number to get to 20 is not a large number to get to.
okay.
Whereas cafeteria workers are usually there for like 4 hours of the day, and that's your 20 hours, right? So there are a good amount of those that are part-time. But they also fit in the low bucket, and they also fit in the high contact bucket. So,
Yeah.
you know, they get a bump as a result of that, dependingly, right?
So there's part-time versus the hours per week, or part-time versus they were working the every other week, like some teachers and some library staff, different.
Right, so the in-person work status is the one that determines whether they were, you know, they were there or not. whether by choice or not. And then the full or part-time, just as part of the employee count to get to the number of things. And that's, again, aligned to, are they working 20 or less hours, or are they working more than 20 hours?
Well,
Can you put that in the, because I didn't, when line 8, when you said a full-time employee was a full, 1 FTE, I didn't understand that you meant that, a full-time employee is anyone who's 20 hours or more.
So it feels like between the two models, I mean, Mark is in here, and I'm sure he would have some inputs, but we could also, if the vote were so one-sided in one way that Mark's vote wouldn't make a difference, you could take a vote, but I don't think it's fair to not include his input. He may have some insights or thoughts that might change people's votes, so I feel like I'm deferring a lot to the 6th and assuming that he's going to be there. But, do we agree we should wait for him to be there before we make some of these kinds of decisions?
I don't think this is getting finalized right now. I mean, we can just give our opinion. I can say that I support Model 2. And
Okay,
if
Dylan,
everybody
that's a-
does down the list, Mark can still talk, say whatever he wants to do, but,
So
you know.
model 2 is the pay scale plus risk.
yeah, I
Right.
mean, we don't have to take a vote on it. We can just, hash out numbers and everything else after the fact. But
Okay, well, I tried earlier to have a vote on start big or start small in that one, so, but maybe we can commit either way to this now, and then so Mark will know the way we feel. I'll put myself down as agreeing with Chris that I like pay scale plus risk. I think that's,
Okay.
risk was always something I was concerned about with the beginning. So Andrew, do you have a thought on either model? Oh, Joe does, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I
Joe.
mean, I like it in principle, I'm just concerned we're gonna get into pitting different categories of workers against each other, and to those points, like, I don't know, that could become too divisive. I know it might be fairer in some
Yeah,
ways,
risk,
but
I should say
that's,
pick plus contact. but
yeah, that's my concern.
So you just think pay scale is easier? Okay,
Yeah.
Joe?
I think
And
I think we're getting it so much finer, like the point earlier, right, about like compared to how most towns have done this, right, you know what I
Oh,
mean?
yeah,
So,
for not a huge amount. All right, I'm just gonna kind of go back and forth. Andrew, did you have a thought? And then I'll go to.
I'd love to be able to sort of play with the model a little bit, because I think, some premium for, greater contact with the public might make some sense, but as we heard tonight, are we counting the sewer workers who have to go into people's houses? I don't know if we picked that up in the model yet. I think, buried in the detail is, as a concept, risk is great, but I'm not sure that it's just, we've really been able to pick up true public contact in data positions we have. And then the other thing is the level of premium that you get for that. How much do you mark someone up for if they had more public contact?
So maybe I'm just gonna put you as a no on that for now without more information. I'll put an asterisk.
Yeah, I'd like to be able to sort of play with the model a little bit. I love playing with Excel, so I'm really impressed by it, but,
And Sean, you had your hand
$500,
raised?
Andrew.
Yeah,
Cash
I'm leaning towards Model 1 for many of the same reasons that Andrew just outlined. I wouldn't have thought that the sewer workers, were in people's homes. I never would have crossed my mind. And I worry that, if we try to make these decisions at a bargaining unit level or a team of people level or whatever, we're probably gonna be missing nuance that is gonna create those conditions that they were asking us not to create, which are like the person that sits next to the other person making the argument that it's, it's not fair that you got what you got, because here's the actual risk that I had. Like, and not a knock on Tom, but like we captured school secretaries as low, but remember that, like, didn't we?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's the pay
I
category,
think
not
almost
the risk
everyone
level.
that came to us
That's not the risk level, I'm
claimed
sorry,
they had
yeah.
eye contact. It was only a.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of the point.
Category of low
That's
contact
sort
is
of the point,
small.
right? So like, so we've got dispatch, for instance, in low. Members of the public, no, but how many, potentially ill but asymptomatic police officers are walking through dispatch in a given day? I don't know, right? So I'm hesitant to include that kind of thing that isn't objective. The other dimensions around like how much, were you in person or not? How many months were you in? Those are all, what is your sort of relative pay on a scale compared to some others? Those things are objective. We may not get them perfectly right, but at least they're inherently, they're intended to be objective. I think when we start trying to think about community contact, I worry that we're gonna miss some of those use cases, or we're gonna create some of those situations where you're pitting, one group of coworkers against another because they don't view it as fair.
Okay, Tom, did you have anything either way?
Again, I love the fact that Sean and I are so opposite sometimes. I'm on the opposite side of that, and I think it's not as hard as we were thinking it is. I think the exception cases are just that, they're exceptions. I admire and I appreciate that people would go into somebody's house because there's a sewage backup, but that's not happening to, 100 people a day, right? Whereas a teacher is seeing 100 kids a day. That's a big difference in terms of what your impact is. So, yes, sewage did have COVID in it, but guess what? So did 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th graders have COVID in them too, right? So, I think that's where I'm thinking, let's not overthink this. It's a relativity of where that group is in terms of how frequently they were touching the public or contacting the public. And I don't think it's going to be that hard for us to sit down with Fidel and Tom and say, what's on the relativity scale? And that's what this is. This is a relativity scale. Are they meeting a lot of public people on a daily basis, or are they not?
So you're a
And
model two.
I'm a model two
Okay.
person.
Chris,
Yeah, can I
but
just?
I wanna ask these guys.
I think that hearing, yellow vest person again, speak,
Amy.
yes, I'll just call him that forever, even regardless if I know his name, but, I just think hearing that makes me lean towards, I already said Model 2, but hearing what he said would make me lean towards Model 1, because we don't wanna pit people against each other, but the way that you have to scale that out is, aren't you gonna pit people against each other who, a fireman that went into somebody's house throughout COVID for the entire year gets $1,000, and someone who was fully remote for the entire year gets $1,000? Are you not pitting those two people against each other to be like, dude, look what I did
How would
compared to
that
you?
happen with with these models though?
Yeah, all these
But
models
just go
assume,
into-
everybody who gets compensated in these models has some contact with the public. There's certainly a span of degrees, right? But there's not anybody in here that we would, I think, contemplate giving hazard pay to who was remote the whole time. In fact, some of those adjustments that Tom made, the reason you see cohorts for elementary, middle, and high is we even cut based on when the schools return to in person.
Yeah, cause like high
Right?
school was much later
Yeah,
than kindergarten and grade.
yeah.
So you don't think you're gonna miss somebody in 6 months into these kind of scenarios? I just, like I said in the beginning, there's a clear delineation between someone that went into contact with people with COVID, like on a continual basis, and somebody who did not. I don't know how we can just justify that. Like I said when Mark was here before, would you be in the same room with me if I had COVID right now? That's essentially what it is. So if you pick Model 1, you would be in the room with me with COVID, and you think it's fine. I highly doubt that's actually how you think. And that's really what it boils down to. Like, men, women, and et cetera, going into people's houses, going into classrooms, exposing themselves to COVID compared to people that weren't. Like, I know we don't want to pit people against each other, and whatever anyone ends up getting, once again, at least it's something, but there's a clear difference. I don't even know how that is even up for debate. I
Well, don't think
understand it.
if the model has objective criteria, like, well, you had to see the public to a high degree, you get more money than a low degree, people ought to feel fair if they're saying, well, it was this was objective, and then the people would just be arguing, did I see the public high or low? I don't know.
Well, that's
Can
why
I just hear from Joe and Dr. Coram before we go to?
Yeah, well, I already said Model 1, but.
Right, so you said Joe, I'm sorry, Dr. Coram, did you have a preference?
So, I hear both what Tom and Sean are saying. I guess I kind of like Model 2, but maybe we, compromise by making it a low differential, right? If it's only a 10% difference, whether you're high or low or something, then probably, even if we get something a little bit wrong, it's not gonna make that big a difference to the final number that they get.
Sounds like Mark Doxer will be the tiebreaker whenever we hear from him. Well, we have we have four on Model 2 and 3 on Model 1, and I would bet Mark is Model 1, so we're an even number of people there.
Which is where, I mean, that's the thing about
Yeah.
Model 2, is that it does allow that, it can make the community contact 5%, 10%,
Yeah,
whatever it is.
yeah, and I mean, if I could just, Chris, respond for a minute, I don't think anybody disagrees there are clear differences in the physical risk that people took based on their job. I think the philosophical discussion and the reason that, that I'm not at a place where I want to see a massive differential driven by that is that I don't believe that the intent is only to compensate for the physical risk that people took, right? It's not, we've colloquially called it hazard pay, but it's not hazard pay. It's premium pay for essential workers, and even the language in the original guidance talks about, some of the other challenges and some of the other implications that COVID had on people and on the way that they do their jobs and, disruption and, disruptions and so forth. So in my mind, that's why I don't maybe want to lean on that as heavily as you do. If we land on a differential for that and it's, something small to moderate, like I'm not going to lose sleep over that, but that's why I'm not in a place where I'm, want to give that person 4x what this person gets if they both worked with the public during the state of emergency. That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, that's more eloquent sort of version of what I was trying to say. Is that we're talking about, the high school teachers didn't have to go back into the classroom, but their entire mode of teaching got completely reversed. They had to undo everything they knew about lesson planning and how they do things and try and run Zoom classes with zero warning and zero preparation, which I can only imagine if you took my job and tried to make, say, oh, by the way, everything you've done for the last 40 years, have to do it completely differently now. I may not catch COVID, but it's still a huge disruption and a major change in my life. And I'm not sure that that's what I was sort of saying before. I think calling it hazard pay, I don't think that's the only thing we're trying to compensate for. I think we're talking about disruption.
I just think to Andrew's point, though, the problem with that is, and I'm not minimizing the effects and ramifications of everybody, but essentially everybody had to redo everything in their lives again. Essentially, that's it. My job, fortunately, unfortunately, doubled the amount of work that I had to do, because I had to support the increase in remote work that people needed, and some going into the office, et cetera. And then same thing with my wife going into Children's Hospital, et cetera. She's not going to get anything for this. I'm not going to get anything for this. Our lives were all changed. Pretty much all the kids and everything else going forward, it's the same thing. Everybody got hosed by COVID equally. But there is a difference between those that went into the places that had known COVID against the ones that didn't. I mean, it's just, I don't know.
Well, I think even Model 1, I know Andrew mentioned the mental effort, and I think actually the teachers didn't have to turn on a dime. They had several weeks of training and it was phased in. But I think Model 1 is also trying to take into account the in-person, so it's really not, even if you favored Model 1, it's really not favoring the mental effort as much, because we're still counting the in-person, and I kind of feel like everyone who supports Model 2 kind of inherently also supports the Model 1, because that's the baseline upon which Model 2 was built. So I think we all at least support Model 1. And I think even though I personally thought of Model 2, I'm appreciating the consideration of defining medium contact and high contact, and now it's going to be decided maybe out of the public sphere by someone sitting down with the superintendent and the town manager and going person by person and saying, or category by category.
There's no, I mean, I think one of the key things we tried to do in building this is to avoid the like crazy fine grained granular stuff.
But is
Right.
but is category by category too granular for some people? That's what I'm wondering.
For me, it doesn't matter. If teachers were in person, they were in person. Police were in person, they're in person. Like that's, you know, that's where it is for me. Anybody, if cafeteria workers were in person the entire time and whatnot, I mean, they should be
But
getting the same as.
but model 1 is taking into account that. It's model 2 saying in person, well, how risky was your in person? That's the, how
Well,
much was your in person? How,
Model 2 is
Contact.
saying that if you were in person, but you were in your office with, you know, the 4 other people you're always with, and it's always the same people, you're not seeing a bunch of other people, then inherently your risk is different than if you're in a classroom or you're going into people's houses a lot for, or you're arresting people on the street or whatever that are not that known quantity, right? I think the concept there is pretty simple. Whether we want to do it or not is a different story, but if you're in a pod, and ironically, that's what a lot of people did, is created pods of people they trusted, and they put their kids with those pods, and those are the people that we know are going to do certain things, they're going to handle things a certain way. The risk, we did that because we perceived risk to be lower if we did that, right? That's the same concept here for those people who were in person, because they couldn't work remotely or some other reason, but they were in person with the same 5, 6, 10 people all the time, versus people that were in person with a continuous stream of different people. There's just again for me, and to agree, it sounds like Chris, there's a different risk that goes with that level of in-person. We're recognizing the in-person with the first one. We're saying, not only were you in person, but you saw a lot more people, and therefore your risk is higher with the second one.
okay, well, it sounds like we're maybe not gonna fully resolve that tonight. I think we should hear Mark's input too, but probably I think we all at least would support Model 1, even if we prefer Model 2, if the whole group supports Model 1. Say we come to that at the next meeting, we still have to determine an amount, and we're mostly coming towards that, and there may be outliers. So, I guess I'm just gonna, I'm not bad with football analogies to punt it. Let's just decide it all on the 6th. Then,
You had it, punting it, exactly,
Okay.
yeah.
You could
We
say,
still have October 12th as well. Marianne,
Well,
right?
I think
So
that's
we
when we
want to
want
finalize
it.
as much as possible on the 6th.
what,
but the
so
12th is-
between, today is Wednesday, this is Labor Day weekend, and the 6th. Are we gonna hit the 6th and you're still not gonna have information to finalize these models, or can we just go with what you have now? I mean, what is this additional information? It shouldn't change the models, right? that
It
you're
won't
waiting
change,
for?
it won't change the structure of the model, it'll add additional people and categories of people, right? So, that will materially impact how much is teacher X or cafeteria worker Y gonna get, because there's now more people in the pool, right? But otherwise, it's not gonna materially change it, so I mean, I'll look to Fidel in terms of how long you think it's for you and Sean to produce the data we talked about, but
They've only got one day, and then there's no work Friday.
We were notified today, so we only had a few hours, but, I think we can get the information tomorrow.
The number of people, I think, is gonna be less than 10% of the denominator here, right? I think we'd expect that. So,
well, I mean, the numbers, so if I look over here, for example, at this is a pretty decent sized list of people, 30. So, yeah, I mean, but there's all their unions that are on top of that too. So.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, maybe 10, maybe
They're
15,
smaller.
maybe 20%.
So
but yeah.
so anyway, it's in that range. So,
Yep.
no, what I've observed tonight, though, is it feels like most of us are orienting our thinking in the premium pay bucket around what's that sort of bottom line number that we feel comfortable with.
Well, that's gonna affect all the other categories too,
Right.
getting to our big versus small.
Right, but I'm not hearing people saying, the range being 5 to 1,200 versus 7 to 1,500 is how I'm thinking about it. I'm hearing people saying, I feel like, with the other things I want to prioritize, I'm gonna be comfortable at 750, or I'm gonna be comfortable at 900K total, for the bottom line. So I think we can probably still, have a reasonable conversation on the 6th, and if we get that data later, or we're not able to all consider it in time, and we come back on the 12th and we need to make a small adjustment, like, we can do that, but At least I'm in a place where, you know, I feel like I can feel pretty good about what I want to allocate for premium pay on the 6th.
Right, so I think we're kind of getting into future agenda items and doing it, 40 minutes ahead of time, 35 minutes ahead of time, which is good. So my action will be to make sure everyone has a revised, accurate spreadsheet with Andrew's numbers, town numbers in, and I'll try to make sure Jackie sends that out. I can't promise that will happen tomorrow, but it should happen, so that Jackie would be able to send it out. See, unfortunately, it's going to be, if our meeting's on Tuesday, I could put it in the agenda, but the packet won't be ready till Tuesday with that information. I just know I won't be able to get a spreadsheet changed by the end of the day tomorrow.
Jackie can email it to us directly, it doesn't have to be in the packet.
Right,
Yeah.
I know, just for the public, it shouldn't change our decisions for the public, so I'll have that.
And technically, it's packet material only, so theoretically, you could email it to us directly. You're not impugning an opinion by doing so. You're not deliberating by doing so. You're saying, here's the materials for the meeting, period.
Well,
If
it's
she
not,
updates her allocations, would you argue that's a deliberation? She's stating an opinion
She
on
shouldn't
the-
be doing
yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't planning on that, but some
Right.
of us are talking about doing that, but then that would involve sending it all to Jackie and putting it out, so at our next meeting, we can have an updated spreadsheet with our most recent things, and then mark that up during the meeting like Tom was doing here, then you avoid any issue of not deliberating in public.
We should just send it all to Jackie by that date. That seems easy enough. She can just update it. It'll take her like 5 minutes a person, as long as everyone,
I mean, yeah, 'cause it's all
Fills
built
it
in,
out.
it's just some,
yeah.
the only thing I wanna do is, like, take the things where either we've already allocated, so we're not confused, or we've gotten grants, and there's a couple of places to be updated, okay?
I mean, maybe we can find that out by tomorrow-ish, because that's, only gonna be a handful of items, like 3 to 5 or something. And then everyone just sends their info to Jackie by Tuesday at
That sounds good.
Noon.
Send it
something like that.
by Tuesday, and
But
I can
is
remind you.
Jackie gonna send out the most recent version, because we made changes during,
Yeah, that's what she
Tom's
would
gonna,
kinda do.
Tom made
yeah.
some markups tonight, and I think he can send that.
okay, with
to
everyone's,
Jackie
and
and
then with the
Mhm.
changes and like what's been approved, and, okay, what's changed, okay. In terms of the amount requested, okay.
And I think if that can go back out to everyone for markup for Tuesday, like that, we should be, maybe if that goes into Jackie, maybe Jackie can resend that out to everyone tomorrow to have to work on over the weekend. And,
Yeah, like everyone doesn't have to know Chris changed X, Y, Z. They have to know that we minus 23,000 because this project is, got paid for by
right,
grant.
just to clean that up, and then
Yeah.
there, the spreadsheet was rippling all these thoughts before we had our great formula on premium pay, and I'm just gonna kinda leave that as a bottom line number with an asterisk, subject to the formula, because that is growing. So we might have a couple of, brief follow-ups from the church and from the Y at the next meeting, but the bulk of it will probably be, getting to the final point here. If Mark has any thoughts, and I guess in places where people are an outlier, like Mark was an outlier in some of his numbers, he may change. And hopefully if he doesn't change, well, then we're gonna be voting on things here, and we'll see where it goes, but, if he hasn't watched the meeting, I can try to at least communicate with him that this is what everyone has to do. He'll probably know though. So I guess, any other future agenda items beyond what we seem to be coalescing towards? I don't think we've picked the high versus low, but I think we kinda know we'll probably have money left for a lot of the low, once we refine the higher numbers. So, the last thing, I think, in our agenda, and maybe we can be out by 9:30, is reviewing and approving the minutes from the August 3rd meeting, which is at the end of the packet. Jackie, again, a great job on the minutes. I think a lot of it was, detail of what the units were saying to us. Does anyone have any thoughts or any motions?
Move to approve the minutes of August 3rd.
Second.
Okay, I have to do a roll call. And I know, Andrew, you weren't here, but I still have to call you. Andrew?
Yes, approve.
Or abstain? But, okay,
You can approve.
you can approve. No, you can approve, that's fine. Sean?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Dr. Corum?
Yes.
And Mary Ann, yes, so 8-0. Any other motions for the evening?
Just before you do that,
Okay,
I'll give you time to do that. I
yeah.
also just sent Jackie the model so she can distribute that to other people, because I know Andrew said he wanted to look through it. Obviously, we'll have to update it with the numbers we mentioned before, but the as-is numbers are there. There's nothing confidential necessarily in there either. I have that in a separate spreadsheet, so you should be good
So it's just by category and not by
just by
name?
category, yep.
I'm afraid to touch that model. Okay. Any other motions this evening?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, this requires a roll call, and is Andrew off the Zoom? Andrew?
He's still there.
Okay, there was a motion to adjourn?
No, I don't want to adjourn.
You can vote against it.
I've always wanted to do that.
Sean?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Chris?
Yeah.
Joe?
Yes.
Dr. Corum?
Yes.
Mary Ann, yes. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Bye.